This podcast is brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine for those that love to make and drink great beer. To learn more or to subscribe, visit beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew. For this episode of the Craft Beer and Brewing Podcast, we've assembled an all-star crew of hoppy IPA brewers. We're going to talk about cold IPA, and I'm going to dub this our hot takes on cold IPA just because in my typical editor parlance, I have to kind of create that kind of contrast and quippiness to it. Joining me for this episode, Sam Tierney, brewing manager of the Firestone Walker Propagator in Venice, California. Welcome back to the podcast, Sam. I think this is number 3.
Yeah, thanks, Jamie. Stoked to be here.
Firestone has taken this cold IPA framework, turned it into national brands, and done it in probably the largest kind of commercial way that we've seen out there. So interesting to, I'm very curious to get your take on it. Also joining me, the guy that coined the term cold IPA and first made it, Kevin Davey, co-founder of Cold.Beer, co-owner of Heater Allen in McMinnville, Oregon, former brewmaster of Wayfinder, under which he developed the very first cold IPA. Kevin Davey, welcome back to the podcast, Kevin.
Thanks for having me, Jamie. I'm always excited to be here.
I should also note that earlier this year, we got out to McMinnville and filmed a video class on cold IPA with Kevin. So if you want Kevin's full unvarnished take on brewing cold IPA and you were an all-access subscriber to Craft Beer and Brewing, look forward to that class sometime in the next few weeks here in the month of December. And also joining me from Chicago, Jude LaRose, co-founder of Hop Butcher for the World, who our readers recently voted the #1 small regional brewery of the year in 2023. That's wild, Jude. That's wild.
It's totally wild. Great to be back. I think we've been listening to the podcast for 5 years since, way back 2018. I think it was a late night in Minneapolis. We did our first one. So I feel like I'm home always listening to you in my car. So it's good to be on here. It's great to be on here and great to be on with all you guys too, talking about one of my favorite topics.
Like I said, we're going to talk about cold IPA, where it is now, a couple years into this whole cold IPA movement, what it means, how it's evolved, and whether it's relevant. But really, we're going to leave the conceptual stuff towards the end and start talking about how you all have built, extended, and are using this kind of framework of cold IPA to accomplish some of the technical things and the creative things that are possible within this world of IPA brewing. Before we do that, for years, G&D Chillers has chilled the beers you love, partnering with 3,000 plus breweries across the country. They're proud of the cool partnerships they've built over the past 30 years. They know brewing doesn't stop at 5 o'clock, nor do they. G&D uses quality components, expert craftsmanship, and constant innovation. With 24/7 service and support, your brewery will never stop. Remote monitor your chiller for simple and fast access to all the information you need, providing you with the peace of mind your operation is running smoothly. Reach out for a quote today at gdchillers.com or call to discuss your next project. Also, this episode is sponsored by BSG, distributors of Gambrinus Malting, Canada's original small batch artisanal malt house. Located in Armstrong, BC, Gambrinus Malting combines European-influenced malting practices with the finest barley, wheat, and rye to produce some of the finest Canadian malts available. Visit bsgcraftbrewing.com/Gambrinus to explore their full line of traditionally crafted malts and infuse your next brew with the character of the Okanagan Valley and Monashee Range. And if you hear Old Orchard mentioned in the brewing community, don't be surprised. The flavored craft juice concentrate blends from Old Orchard have shipped to over 46 states. Their new brewing customers often mention discovering Old Orchard through the word-of-mouth recommendation of another brewer. To join the core of Old Orchard's brewing community, learn more at oldorchard.com/brewer. Maybe we'll kick off the discussion here with a kind of broad, and general question. And maybe I'll start with Sam, because Kevin, as you have admitted, you're not currently brewing cold IPAs, or have you been able to start brewing ales again? I know you're opening up a new cellar there, Gold Dot and Heater Allen, in order to kind of create the capacity and make some of those hoppy beers. But are you doing it yet?
Our first one came out, is we're literally sending the kegs out today. So, 3 weeks ago we brewed one. So, Yeah, it's exciting. We've brewed into the new cellars last week and yesterday, and then we're going to go back at it tomorrow.
Well, in that case, let's talk about it. The original cold IPA that was called Relapse and then rebranded as Original Cold IPA that you created at Wayfinder, kind of set the initial idea afloat in the world. As you approach cold IPA now, how has it changed for you?
I frankly, I've always thought of it as just being a really great canvas for hops, and that was kind of what we set out to do. I found that a lot of other people have made cold IPAs in a different way, like to where some of them are more approaching that West Coast pills, kind of like Timbo situation. And I found those to be lovely. And I've found most people are not making them in this as strikingly bitter as the original like Relapse one, which was more of like a homage to like Southern California and like Ballast Point and Firestone and all that stuff, where it was actually had like some bitterness to it, that's the kind of beer that I really like, and so like I wanted to bring that back because we were in this point where it was like all beers started being hazy and juicy and low bitterness, and I knew that was a trend, and I'm like, well, there's plenty of people that haven't really signed up for the trend, even though it's currently making waves in our whole thing. So I'll try to make something just for that. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that there's been a lot of experimentation with bitterness in that regard, and also with gravity, which has been a good change. But I mean, honestly, most of the exciting part is just using hops in a different way and trying to see what they can do on a more naked canvas where there isn't a bunch of ester and a bunch of other types of like oats and other types of things getting in the way of the total flavor of the hops.
Sure. Jude, you all brew those sweet and hazy beers also. And how do you balance those two things? And as you're thinking about cold IPA, Jude, today, what is it about the idea of cold IPA that resonates with you as a brewer?
Whether it's a clear beer or whether it's a hazy beer, hop butcher has always been about the hops. So I think like our very first beer in 2015 was like an Australian hop brown ale. We did our third beer was a Nelson Sauvin hop saison. So there was always some focus on hops. And when we were developing our palate here in Chicago, I mean, we had Goose Island, and we're only about 45 minutes away from Three Floyds. So they were one of our favorite breweries kind of coming up. Half Acre was one of our favorite breweries coming up. So we were always drinking their pale ales. Really, I mean, we cut our teeth on kind of clear 2013, 14 IPA. So, it's always been a love. So it's not different for us to brew a non-hazy beer. And the biggest thing, I've got a story for it, is during our first hop selection, we flew into Portland and then we drove to Yakima and back. But months prior to that, we were on this big Italian style pills kick, and we had never tried one. So I had emailed into Wayfinder's info box, and Kevin replied. And Kevin said, hey, you can give me a phone call. So I was at my kitchen table, and Kevin walked me through, his approach to Italian style pills. So months later, when we were finally at Wayfinder, we said, we have to stop in. I wanted to see if, I think it was like Terrifica or Horrifica. I wanted to see if that was on tap. It wasn't, but Relapse was on tap. And we just started asking a bunch of questions. And even our head brewer, Justin Miller, when we got down to it, and they're like, it's lager yeast. Even him for a quick second was like, oh, that's not an IPA or whatever. He did it for a quick second. But I'll never forget the description was, I think, something like more West Coast than West Coast. And this abstract idea, we immediately got it. And to me, it was the most crystalline expression, hop expression you could possibly have. And when we went there, the whole trip was magical, but we fell in love with the beer, and then we came home and we told everybody in our little brewing circle about it. And we said, we got to brew one of these. So there's a lot of romance behind it, but it also felt like we had found something that no one knew about yet. And we just wanted to kind of give it a go. And again, we thought it was so cool because the description was great. And the most packed in frozen treatment and canvas for hops in the world, like who would want to crush so many of those. So that's been our approach too is we can brew, West Coast IPA that uses Chico yeast and ferments at 68 and kind of has this soft fuzz of ester character. But when we really want to get super duper tight and frozen and crystalline, our go-to is cold IPA. We've been fighting that fight ever since.
Interesting. Sam, for you guys in Firestone Walker, what is the cold IPA canvas offer to you all?
Well, yeah, for us, I think the motivation goes back a long time, and it kind of weaves in and out through like West Coast pills and hoppy lagers and kind of mentally getting to the place where we kind of realize that this is what we wanted to be doing. And I have to credit, conversations with Kevin over a couple of years and asking a lot of questions for, I think, getting me in the right headspace for us to really go for it. But yeah, it's,
and we should acknowledge that Kevin is also a former Firestone Walker, also at an earlier point in his career.
Yeah, and Sam were on the overnight shift together. It was awesome. I remember many times driving to Atascadero to get in and out for everybody.
Yeah, that was a great era. That very early in my career. I know Kevin started brewing a bit earlier than I did. But yeah, good times, very formative. But yeah, I mean, for us, so Union Jack, was our flagship West Coast IPA that we've brewed, I think it's 17 years now. I want to say it was late 2006. And, we have this English yeast that's estery, it's expressive. And, that was the defining character of our IPA game for many, many years. And so we come at it from a slightly different perspective, I think, than a lot of brewers that were used to using, a Cali El Chico type yeast. And, we were always like, okay, can we get a cleaner, more pure hop expression? And so that led us into pursuing hoppy lagers. But the formula for that hadn't been quite perfected yet. We never felt 100% like this was something we could go all in on. And so there was a few seasonal releases, they tend to be lower gravity. We did some IPLs, so we kept playing around with it. But then, yeah, it wasn't until, I remember, I think, Kevin, when was that? Was it 2019 summer I visited and you had Relapse Original Cold IPA. And I remember you gave me a can. And, I had just taken over the Propagator Brewery and was doing a lot of small batch stuff, just coming up with new recipes at the time and trying to develop new things here. And I remember thinking, oh, this is like this, just, it's cold, it's crisp, it's light, and yet it's super hop forward. And it was expressing hops in a way that, I hadn't really experienced in an IPL. It felt fundamentally different for me. Even if you can argue on paper, there's a lot of similarities there, you had done something different. So that kind of flipped a switch where, I wanted to pursue that, but I guess I didn't feel completely comfortable with exactly how we were going to do it. And so it took us a little bit. And then we had been wanting to pursue this, using lager yeast in a hoppy beer, like I said, for a while. And so when the idea came to do a new year-round IPA, which became Hopnosis for us, which is now, one of our full release beers, we knew we had to kind of approach it slightly differently. So we pulled in some of this stuff, conversations with Kevin, our friends over at Highland Park here in LA, do a lot of hoppy beer with lager yeast as well. And, they take a little bit of a different approach. But we kind of, pulled all that together, and that's the beer that became Hopnosis for us. And so, I think it's similar to the, beers Kevin makes in some ways, but also a little bit distinct. And I think, like Kevin already said, everyone kind of comes up with their own unique approach to this that works for them in their brewery, and we all have a slightly different way of thinking about it. But fundamentally, we're all looking for that same thing, that super clean hop expression, the clean fermentation character, and, hopefully the stability too. And I think for us, the stability was a big driving factor, whether it's, controlling fan, whether it's sulfur content from the fermentation.
I think it's interesting because like when you say like on paper, it's a lot like you can make the argument that it's IPL. I think it's interesting because it's kind of like one of these things that it's like a developing style. And so you have people that whether it fits exactly into what I was thinking of as cold IPA, whether it has the adjunct load, like I know that Hopnosis might not have the adjunct load that I think is indicative in the style, but I still think it fits because you're kind of getting to the same finish line, whether you want it or not, right? And what I think is interesting is that as the style progresses, even if there is going to be differences, like people still are going to want to call it cold IPA because the pie in the sky of what that beer is not going to change. People are going to want something that is clear, crisp, expressive of hops, expressive of new hops, in a way that IPL never really achieved. And I feel bad for that because I know that there's a lot of great brewers that have introduced IPL, and I specifically say this to brewers near to my heart, which are lager brewers like Enegren and Jack's Abbey, and people that make IPL and are behind IPL. And I feel like they're probably the ones that I feel the worst when they're upset about cold IPA, because I'm like, these are my guys, these are the lager guys, you know, and I don't want them mad at me, but I think that maybe it was my tenure at Firestone. I have like an IPA streak on in me that, you know, the other lager brewers just don't really have. I don't know. Maybe I do. Maybe I don't. I just wanted to be even just more aggressive, more punch in your face, and just different. And I think that's the driving force in cold IPA, is that I think it is able to stand out as being its own thing. I'm sorry, I'm going on a total tangent, but IPL is very close to cold IPA, but you know, steam beer is really close to American amber lager. What's the difference? It's the people brewing it. It's what they're trying to achieve with what they're making, and it's what they want to call it.
Kevin, I think you're spot on. I think that if I remember correctly, the kind of like what you wanted to do is there was a lot of hazy IPA out, and you kind of wanted to, you know, kind of take the piss out of it a little bit. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but then you said, like, let's kind of, you know, build this like a malt liquor, and let's also load it up with hops. And I think that when we saddled up to the bar and we had it, it didn't feel like a gimmick. It landed like IPA. And yeah, I mean, I think that a lot of like IPLs, you know, they had a different profile, and maybe they were a little clunky. I think that, you know, one of the first IPLs I ever had was like a Mikkeller half-acre collab called Guest Lager that they released out of their original location. It was hopped with Nelson Sauvin. And looking back on that to me, if I went back, I feel that would taste like cold IPA. Like that beer always made sense. But, you know, and when we talk about, there's like two things. One, when we talk about innovation, or we talk about what's like the next big thing, and you take a look at what hazy IPA, you know, its place in the brewing world, or what it did and how it took everything by storm, and we wonder where it's coming from next. Kind of the process changes, and cold IPA definitely has a place. There is a profile of those beers it's not West Coast Pilsner, it's not Italian style Pils, it's not hoppy lager. I mean, you know it when you taste it. So I think it's kick-ass, and what I think it's done, and how we look at other beers and how we approach other beers. I mean, I think it's huge.
I think there's a lot to be said here too for the power of branding, and I think we often throw that, think of that as this kind of skeezy thing. But if you look at the history of beer, man, you know, throughout the last 150 years of the industrial world of beer, being able to sell that beer is pretty important, and having great terms that actually sell that. You know, you look at the evolution of the words like stout and porter, what they mean and what those beers are that are sold under those things changed over 30, 40 years. You know, as customers' tastes changed, the idea of what pale lager is very different, depending on where you are. But the idea of these things and the idea of a name for something, being able to sell it, is important. And let's just be honest, like cold IPA sounds way more awesome than India Pale Lager. India Pale Lager is also a kind of hacked together term, a mashup of some things that doesn't have a historical precedent, nor does cold IPA in that sense. But, what would you order if you saw it on the menu? I just see cold IPA and think, hey, that's great. That's my soapbox, on that whole thing. But I want to talk about, what some of those core tenets are. Like you say, Kevin, adjunct load fits into this, longevity fits into it, Sam, hop expression and that kind of crystalline character are some of the core tenets. I want to kind of define what it looks like now in terms of some of the kind of key recipe points, not thinking about it in just a pure like style guide dogmatism, because I think that, we all agree that it has to be bigger than that, and putting out very distinct rules is kind of antithetical to the idea of creativity in brewing and seeing how brewers take and respond to these things. Before we do that, ProBrew is excited to announce that they are currently featuring short lead times between 2 and 4 weeks for their in-stock ProFill rotary can fillers. These can fillers run at speeds between 100 and 600 plus cans per minute while achieving precise and consistent filling volumes not achievable by most inline and mobile fillers. For more information, fill out their contact form on www.probrew.com or email contact us at probrew.com to learn exactly how they can take your operations to the next level. ProBrew, brew your beer. Also, you like wildly aromatic IPAs and tropical lagers? Good Thing Omega designed thiolized yeast for just that reason. Thiolized yeast are a new tool for brewers to bring intense guava and passion fruit aromas out of your malt and hops. And wait, there's more. Omega yeast makes yeast to order with a consistent 1-week lead time, ensuring peak freshness and reliability. And don't miss keynote speaker Rob Todd from Allagash Brewing Company at the 2024 California Craft Beer Summit in Sacramento, March 12th through 14th. The summit is a can't miss event. 2 days of educational sessions, a huge interactive expo floor, beer and food tastings, and networking with industry leaders. There's something for everyone. Buy tickets today and receive the lowest prices. Early bird registration on sale now through December 22nd at craftbeersummit.com. Well, let's talk about what cold IPA is now in technical terms. Are there some kind of key, flagpoles, for the style of the broader style of cold IPA, the things what makes a cold IPA, as all three of you see it?
So, Kevin and I had a conversation about Italian style pills. We didn't have it about cold IPA. So when we came home, we put it together the way that we thought it might be put together. This is before any of the literature is out or Kevin fought the good fight for a good year. I at every podcast talking about cold IPA, and it was sick too. They even just put it on the website and said, this is how you do it. But we came home and we still brew it the same way. We started with Weyermann Extra Premium Pilsner Malt, super duper pale malt, at around 70 to 75%, something in that range. And then because we wanted that to be really bare, but we wanted a tiny bit of malt complexity, I think we landed on 10% Munich, just to add maybe a biscuit character to it, maybe a touch of color. We use acidulated and terrafoam or chit in everything that we do at about 5%. And then I think maybe another 5% of Briess white wheat, just for some body and maybe a little bit of that snap, but also sweetness. And I think also we've always been in love with white wheat since the Surly, Three Floyds, Maine, when those kind of pale ales and IPAs that felt like they all had white wheat in them or red wheat. And then, we weren't 3470, we were Augustiner. And I think that Kevin would, say if the standard cold IPA might be fermented at 65, we were still kind of treating it like a lager. So I think we still do. We fermented it 52 and raised that up to 56 for a rest. And then, the very first time we spun all of our beers, but that first time when we had dry hopped and we had kept it, we had this eggy sulfur that we could not shake. That was kind of distracting. So I think since then we've just dry hopped and then let it go a couple of days, let that blow off and cap it. So we're excited because we've never actually brewed it. If we call it true to style, we've never brewed it true to style, but we've kind of just stuck with that and felt that was kind of the hop mature approach to cold IPA. And we just have to continue to refine it.
That's interesting. I'm interested that you dry hop so cold because we started, especially with Italian Pilsner. It was kind of we're going to dry hop this beer, but I wanted to reuse the yeast. And so I know optimum dry hopping for me would be just at the tail end of fermentation before harvest, before it's really cold. And because we harvested, historically we would harvest cold. We would chill it down to around the 35 Fahrenheit and harvest at 35 and then get it down to 0. 32. So for that one, we would chill it down to 45. And then we would dry hop it and kreuzen it for the Italian Pilsner. And I just always felt it worked with very low amounts of European hop at that temp and at that level. But when we tried to do it with cold IPA, when we were like, using Citra and Simcoe and Centennial and Chinook and all these other hops, it did not. The dry hop flavor sucked at 45 degrees. We needed to get that warm. And so we ended up just being like, well, we're never going to harvest from an IPA anyway. We have more lager yeast than we need. So we ended up just dumping as much yeast as we could, let it finish out completely. And then we would dry hop it at 65. And I felt like we got more expression out of some of the hops that we were using at that higher temp. And a lot of that's anecdotal, honestly, like we don't, like at Wayfinder and now at Peter Allen and Gold Dot, we don't make a lot of IPAs. So it's usually me bugging Ben Edmonds at Breakside or Sam at Firestone, just texting my friends, or Chris at Varietal, being like, people that make a lot of hobby beer, like, hey, what have you found about this? Hey, when you dry hop cold, what does that do? Blah, 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 blah. Because like I don't have a lot of darts to throw at the wall here. You know what I mean? I have to kind of place my bets and just go with it. It'd be really fun if we were like, Wayfinder looks like it's a pub, but it was like pretty much a production brewery when, we had to pump out a lot of beer. We were constantly pumping out a lot of beer. And so I didn't really have a lot of chances at anything. And I'm curious about how you guys feel about dry hopping cold.
So, it's kind of, you don't know. So again, going into it, we had friends that dry hop cold, and we've never done it ourselves. And we heard, for some people it turned out well. For some people, I don't know if they said they got more grassy flavors. The first beer that we did, I think it was like an Amarillo, Centennial, Simcoe. And then we were thinking we had to tether it some way back to lager beer. So we dry hopped with a little bit of Super Satzer. So if we typically like religiously dry hop at 68, and then, for our hazy beers, we started dry hopping at like 70 or 72. Again, this was us having a reason to try something different and tasting beers, or just listening to our friends talk about what it was like what it was like, what the dry hop character was like at colder temperatures. We just thought, let's roll the dice and see what it's like. And I don't know. I mean, we were probably at 3.6 pounds per barrel then. We've increased the dry hops to 4. I think we're still wrapping our heads around it. But the way it netted out, it seemed even at that cold temperatures that we were getting some of the elements that we wanted for those hops. But again, it's still things that we're wrapping our head around. And again, I can't wait to ferment at 65, raise it, and dry hop warmer and see what these beers taste like.
Sam, for you guys, what are some of the parameters that you hold to in this kind of cold IPA world?
As far as dry hopping goes, since we're on that right now, we do dry hop warmer, and so we're fermenting around 59 and cooling it a little bit. It's like kind of mid 50s. Let it come up to about 59, and then for a diacetyl rest, we're letting it come up to about 65, and then we'll dry hop there. We used to do a mid-firm dry hop when we first started doing Hopnosis, and that was, we were really getting to know cryomosaic, and we liked it in that utilization. Like I'd kind of got on this kick actually of doing like a start of fermentation, or kind of almost like a dip hop thing with cryo hops, and we had made some beers we really liked with that. We ended up moving that to a mid-firm, thinking that there might be an interesting interaction with the lager yeast, and especially something that's a little more pungent dank like Mosaic. When we were developing that, and it kind of turned out that when we moved it later, we kind of liked it, just putting it all in at the end anyway. And that we, so mid-firm's interesting. We've done a lot of experiments with dry hop timing, and it almost seems like sometimes mid-firm, there are advantages depending on how you want to utilize the hops, but in this application we ended up not feeling like it was the best way to do it. But we still do for actually double Hopnosis, which is our kind of, double cold, even bigger, even badder, with some sugar in there. So, to lean it out. But, so we're dry hopping warmer. We'll dump yeast. We don't harvest.
What are the difference? Like, you say, that mid fermentation, from a sensory perspective, how would you define some of the difference between that and now, this, now at the tail end, process that you use?
Well, yeah. So, we cap our tanks at the end of fermentation dry hop. We're not leaving them open. So part of that was being a little bit worried about sulfur. And, especially, this is something also that you have to think about, tank geometry, tank size, hydrostatic pressure. So larger fermenters, are going to retain more sulfur compounds because, most of the way you're getting rid of sulfur is through mechanical action. It's being scrubbed out with CO2 during fermentation. So, when you're capping that tank, you're arresting that process. And, we were worried that the beers were coming out a little too sulfury. And, we were always chasing this kind of like just sub-threshold or about threshold sulfur character, and we're always looking for sulfidic, never hydrogen sulfide. You want all that out early in fermentation. But, that little light struck match character that, we use 3470, and I think that yeast has a perfect amount of that for when we brew more traditional lagers. It's awesome. It's like, it's just enough to add that perfect, crispness to the flavor profile, add some, flavor stability over time as it mellows out. But in IPA, if you have too much of it, I think it starts to have negative interactions with the hops, especially depending on hop varieties, more sulfur containing hop varieties that are, can lean on the kind of OG, dank, allium type stuff. And so, yeah, especially with Mosaic can lean on that. And so depending on the lot selection, so that's another thing you could go into, do you want to select toward more fruity hops, prettier hops, less dank hops for these, kind of fermentations because you're going to get that sulfur character. So anyway, so the mid-ferm, the initial motivation there was, we want to blow off some more of that. So the earlier you get it in, the more you're going to blow off. The beer's still fermenting out. And then the later dry hop, we're then bunging the tank, and it's usually creeps a bit, but, we're not getting excessive hop creep. But, you're getting some natural carbonation at that point, and you're keeping in whatever's there. So we wanted to be careful there. But it turned out that, with the hops we were getting, and maybe it was moving over, once we got onto some selected Mosaic, in the next year versus the first stuff we were using, it just came out better, and we liked it that way.
One of the things when you talk about that scrubbing action, especially in smaller fermenters, one of the things that we always focused on, whether it was at Chuckanut or at Gordon Biersch, well, I don't know if anybody at Gordon Biersch felt this way, but at Wayfinder too, was between a 15 barrel, 20 barrel, or a 40 barrel fermenter or a 30 barrel fermenter is actually plumbing the glycol to where you can shut off the cone jacket. So during fermentation, actually keeping the cone jacket off, allowing the fermentation to act naturally, the warmer beer will go to the top. The thermal well is going to be right between the jackets on the hip of the cone almost always, and it should be. So as it cools, that cold beer will go down in the tank, and the warmer beer will come up from the cone, and you'll get more of that scrubbing action in a lager fermentation anyway. Just from doing that, you're going to get more movement inside the tank. And I think that there's some definite benefit for that, especially for lager brewers that are making beer that is high in SO2 and trying to make sure that, or SO2 or H2S or any of these things, you're trying to actually get a lot of that out of there, because it's kind of like, with lager brewing, it's always you're playing a balancing act between pitching too much or pitching too little, aerating too much, aerating too little, fermenting too warm, fermenting too cold, and all of those things are at play at the same time. And incorporating tank geometry is another wonderful way of doing that. At Firestone, obviously the very, very large and tall tanks, and the hydrostatic pressure is real. And it fascinated me going to Firestone and seeing a British ale yeast perform in an 800 barrel tank. I was just like, how is this happening? And it performed wonderfully. I think that there was always not VDK problems with the beers, but a lot of work extensively with the GC and making sure that those beers cleaned up in an appropriate amount of time. As compared to Chico, it's just I think that the Firestone yeast maybe took a little bit longer. Sam would be able to speak about it a little bit more than I could, but a lot of that has to do with tank geometry. And you think about a British yeast, and it's born and bred to be fermented in square tanks and pumped over during fermentation and aerated during fermentation, and absolutely like no pressure on it. And for us craft brewers to like take it and morph it and to make it operate in such a German style CCV, it's kind of amazing. So different ways of doing it. I think that turning off the cone is really important. We would also do the inverse of that when we would go into lagering. We would actually turn off the top jacket, open up the cone, get the yeast out, and get it down to like -1. So you're actually adding all the cooling to the bottom, and all the cold beer will go to the top and the warm beer will go to the bottom. And you're not stressing the yeast as much. The yeast that does flock a bit early, you're not just, it's going to insulate the cooling anyway, so that energy is not really going to go through the yeast very comfortably because there's just like a thick case of yeast there. But it is going to freeze the crap out of the ones right next to stainless jacket. So you're going to have a little bit more vitality issues and viability issues.
Since we're talking about dry hopping, and you did bring this up, how do you all select hops for these? Obviously, you're talking about contracts for breweries that need to with hop varieties that need to span particular styles, and yet are there some specific characters that you're looking for and some specific hops that you lean on as you're thinking about dry hopping, particularly within this cold IPA context?
I think that cold IPA offers kind of like the most options when it comes to what your dry hop selection would be. I think like when it comes to like West Coast Pilsner, and maybe this is me being closed-minded, but I feel like West Coast Pils is like really just like Mosaic, Citra, Simcoe, and hops that kind of revolve around that, maybe Equinaut, but it's got this like dank, diesel, caddy, fruity profile. There's some like Italian style Pils. It's got to all be continental hops, German hops, anything kind of grown in that region that would give you kind of like lemon and herb and dill or whatever that profile is. It would remind you of, hops Pilsner. But when it comes to cold IPA, I feel it's a blank canvas. So I feel like, vast possibilities, whatever the profile you're looking for. Our first one was Amarillo, Centennial, Simcoe with a little super saucer. Since then, I don't think we ever went to like a continental hop, but we've done a Citra Vic Secret. We've done a Simcoe Sabro. So really, I think it should remind you of West Coast IPA. I think a lot of the new and emerging hops are kind of defining what that means right now for West Coast IPA. So I think the possibilities are endless. And again, whether it's Sabro, 586, you can use Galaxy, you can use Vic Secret, or you can use Nels. I feel like you can use anything.
Yeah, basic idea of West Coast IPA itself has also been changing over the last few years in curious ways, and and following a lot of different tangents. Kevin, from your standpoint, what are some of those core hops that you lean on, and and why? How do you choose those hops for dry hop and cold IPA?
Well, I mean, because I'm a lager brewer, I'm always a traditionalist, and so Centennial, Cascade, Chinook, those three are in a lot of it. I love those hops, and I think that also when I was designing Relapse, I found those kind of IPAs just completely went away, and I'm like I love all of what Mosaic has done for the industry and what Citra has done for the industry, and it's been able to be. It's like every band gets to have Slash as their lead guitarist. It's like, yes, there's a great solo here. I don't know, but there's something great about just that classic sound, that thing that, you go order a pine IPA and it has like that pine and citrus, that real balanced, nice, clean bitterness, that isn't like the heavy fruit, the heavy juice, tropical mandarin, tangerine, pineapple, smorgasbord. So yeah, I'm always kind of, when I design hoppy beers, I'm always trying to say like, well, I want a little bit from each bucket, and maybe I'll lean on one bucket more. And if the bucket is pine, another bucket's tropical, another bucket is maybe diesel to add a flavor there. So I'm just kind of just shifting the spider graph and saying, well, what is this cold? Is this cold IPA going to be more classic? Is this cold IPA going to be more new school West Coast, where it's focusing on Mosey, Simcoe, Citra, or I'm frankly just so bored of those beers right now. Like our local bottle shop, we go there more often than we should, and we mainly drink lager beers, but I'm always trying everybody. Becky does a great job at the Bitter Muck bringing in these all the great IPAs from the Northwest, and I'm always trying everybody's cans because I always want to see what the next hop profile is. And and when it's just Citra, Mosaic, Simcoe, it's just got that generic hop flavor to me now. It used to be so exciting, and now I feel like I've danced with the same partner at square dance too many times, and I'm sick of it. So I guess maybe that's also me, and that's not the customer. But I'm trying to come up with something else that isn't just that flavor profile.
Yeah, totally. When it comes to some of the first hop experiences I think any of us ever had, like that first experience with Citra, that first experience of Mosaic, I think we're all trying to find that again with something that's coming out. And I think it's cool when you can kind of play the classics, but it's great when you land on something that you've never smelled before and you never tasted before. And, I think that's what cold IPA did and still does. Anytime a new hop would come into our brewery, whether it was Savro, we'd always pair it with Citra or Mosaic and see what the Savro was doing, or Rawaka would come in and we do it again. And the approach that we've kind of started to take is some of the beers that we already do that are goats for us or are in our, our staples for us. We tried to kind of cold IPA those. So if this is how it is on a West Coast beer of ours or a hazy beer of ours, what's it like in a cold IPA profile, and see kind of how all those types of things change.
That's funny because Centennial for me is always my second fiddle. Like if I want to know what a beer like a hop is, I'm going to use that and some Centennial. Like let's see what maybe that's just like blank slate for me. It's just a little bit of Two Hearted, like put on something on top of Two Hearted and taste something. I don't know.
About 4 weeks ago, I had a Two Hearted at the general store at Bell's. We did like a little weekend trip in that area, and it was the brightest, most insane Two Hearted I'd had in so long. And we get it here fresh, but it was so good. What kind of Centennial are you able to play with? What's the profile like?
I've been selecting more like I don't think anybody would say like grape. I don't really know. I mean, I kind of like this Centennial has like this interesting, like, is more fruit forward. It's more juice forward. I don't know it, but it doesn't come across that way when I'm using it. I use a lot of Centennial hot side. So it doesn't really come across that way. When it rubs, I'm one of the firm believers that when I'm doing a selection, I want it to smell nice, and I don't want it to smell like smoke, and I don't want it to smell like garlic and diesel or grass. But I just want it to smell like that hop. And I don't think that just because it smells like a certain thing, it's going to come out in the beer exactly the way that I'm rubbing it. And maybe I'm wrong, or maybe I should be cooling my Whirlpool more often and dry hopping, right before it goes into somebody's glass. I don't know. I'm a little bit more of a traditional. So I'm boiling the hops. I'm a weird guy. I'm stuck in my ways. I swear I'll get it. I'll get it. But I'm still, I don't know.
Sam, as you guys think about dry hopping in the cold IPA space, you have all, as many different hops at your fingertips as you possibly want. And you've got a phenomenal team that, works directly with growers and selects, so some of the best in the business. How do you all go about, thinking about, hops, that work well within this dry hopping space in cold IPA?
We've taken a pretty modern approach for the most part with everything we've done. And I think that if there's one theme I can tease out with some of the different experiments we've done and then Hopnosis kind of exemplifies that, is this combination of getting some New Zealand character in with some new school American character and kind of letting that all, come together in a way that gives us like a little bit of traditional West Coast flair, but leading into some, really exciting fruitiness, leaning on more thiol heavy hops, and I think that it's cool that, especially those like really kind of, ephemeral like characters that you can get out of stuff. Like, I was looking, so, we use a little Nelson neck draw and Rawaka in Hopnosis, and, within those hops, we're always talking about that, that just like really expressive tropical kind of character that you can get, that, you're getting some of these small amounts of thiol compounds. It's not what you're going to get, obviously, if you're using thiol as yeast. But I think within the cleaner fermentation, those compounds pop more, and it's more of a contrast that lets you display that character more fully. And so, I think New Zealand varieties especially work really great with lager yeast. I love making lagers with New Zealand varieties. And so for us, blending that in with some, we got Mosaic in there, but we hardly ever put Mosaic and Citra together, actually. It's usually just like one or the other. So one of our wider releases this year was Another Life, and that was one of our kind of seasonal IPAs that kind of went through the summer. And that was more like, I wanted to bring more adjunct into it. And so, we were using rice in that. And so it was really just, for me, like I was leaning into that side, that I know Kevin's really into pushing it in that direction. And that's, like where cold IPA comes from. And so for me, it was like really leaning into that and saying, we're going to make it super light, super clean, super crisp. And then we just went for this big, Citra profile. And, we usually don't lean very heavily on Citra in any of our IPAs. And we're not a huge user actually. But yeah, that, and then I think El Dorado was a really good backup hop for that as well. And so, so this really, firmly new school character. And sometimes we'll just get a combination, or I'll talk to somebody and it's like, what are you guys hot on right now? And that was just kind of a pairing, and we usually like to blend more varieties together, but featuring 2 hops and a dry hop like that for us can be kind of fun in a smaller release where we're just going to go and say, hey, this is what you're getting out of this. Whereas, with Hopnosis, I think I was like, let me count them right now. It's like 8 varieties. So you got some New Zealand, you got some El Dorado, Idaho 7, Cashmere, Mosaic, so we're kind of rounding everything out there. But firmly new school for sure. Even though we still love some Centennial and, even Cascade and IPA, but we're also using Simcoe though.
I'm not letting go. I'm having a hard time.
No, I know. And, for me, Simcoe is kind of that variety that, it's been around for, since before I started home brewing, and it was always there, but it's been that bridge hop for me that always brings in some more of that traditional, old school West Coast IPA character now, where, I think Centennial, Chinook, we still use actually a decent amount of Chinook as well in our IPAs in general, but not in this beer, and doesn't seem to make as much into cold IPAs for some reason. But I have given it a try, but not currently.
I think the Chinook that we were getting was like indicative of what Relapse was. It was like, for me, it was that Chinook was the star of the show. I mean, it couldn't have been only the Chinook, but man, it stuck out with sore thumb to me. I think that it also was a sign of the times because, it was 2018 and everyone's making very tropical beer and you come out with that kind of a Chinook bomb and it's built in a different way. And it's kind of like painting with the same color that everybody knew, but just on a different canvas. And everyone's like, oh, wow, I like that color. I used to like that color. What happened? And so I don't know. It seems to work. But I think that the cold IPAs that we're going to be doing now will probably be changing it up and doing something a little different.
You're totally right. I think too, I keep harkening back to this time when like Amarillo and Chinook and Centennial seem to have been at like their peak, and Citra is just kind of coming. And Cascade is probably the number 1 hop, in the country. But this is a time like Half Acre, the wet hop beers that I would cut my teeth on here. And I don't know if they were getting it from Hophead Farms or wherever, but I mean, those were all Chinook wet hops, dark ales. Like it was a beer called Sticky Fat, or even close to here, there's a brewery called Two Brothers, and they would release like a wet hop series during that time, and it was just all focused on Cascade, Chinook, and Centennial. We're releasing a beer today called Oregon Cool. If we can show some love to the Pacific Northwest and the hops, and it's just, that profile is Chinook, Centennial, Strata, and CTZ. So I'm just trying to evoke what it what it feels like when we get out there.
We're moving on in time here, and I want to make sure we come back to the subject of malt and adjunct, and making malt selections to help complement this, because I know that's a kind of a key foundational piece, and all of you all have your own thoughts about how to use adjunct, the current state of two-row and what that means, how you select specific two-row for these beers. So I want to talk about that. But first, brewers, are you looking for the best beer, mead, and cider recipes on the planet? Join the American Homebrewers Association to unlock the 2023 National Homebrew Competition medal-winning recipes. American Homebrewers Association members have access to nearly 1,400 trusted and tested recipes, plus a Zymergy magazine subscription, exclusive discounts, live webinars, instruction videos, and more. Plus, sign up for a membership by December 31st, 2023, and select a free brewing book, a $25 value. Learn more at homebrewersassociation.org/CBB pod. Also, when you work with Alpha Brewing Operations, you get unwavering commitment to quality, innovation, and service. Using the latest in brewing equipment, Alpha has helped build hundreds of award-winning breweries and other craft beverage businesses. Now backed with new industry partners, Alpha Brewing Operations is offering a wider selection of equipment, faster shipping, quality ingredients, and advanced financial tools. With Alpha in your corner, the only thing missing is you, the brewer. Let's work together to craft your path to success with Alpha Brewing Operations. Let's come back to that question of malt, and maybe we start talking about what that malt parameter is for you. Kevin, as you kicked it out, you roughly, about 30% adjunct, 70% base malt kind of, percentages. You obviously have left the door open for rice and corn, within this context. And, there are brewers that are using both of those things. But talk to me about the kind of, basics of the basic idea behind using adjunct along with a two-row base malt to create this kind of light, or as Jude might say, crystalline expression, within malt itself.
I think that like rice and corn are going to like, and I've said this before a lot, but what I'm trying to do is fix modern malts to make them. I don't want this beer to exactly like if you look at like 6-row brewers taking corn and rice and trying to emulate like a German Helles or something more of a European lager. That's not exactly what we're trying to do, although that is what the means to the end is. Like I am trying to, by adding a separate grain, corn or rice, we are adding something that has a lower protein and higher starch and lower fan than modern 2-row malts. And we're using a modern 2-row malts. Now, the other fun thing about modern 2-row malts is because so many craft brewers are shooting for like a Pilsner beer, a lager beer, that they've actually lowered a lot of 2-row colors to get that super light color. And you don't really have to if you're using a lot of adjunct. You can kind of have like a higher color 2-row that has less of a dimethyl sulfide precursor. And then once you cut it with the adjunct, you're getting more of that light golden, bright yellow lager. Now, a lot of modern malts are going for a very low color malt, even though they also have a high Kolbach index, high fan, a lot of enzyme potential, and pretty high protein, regardless of the fact that it's been over modified or very well modified. So, in using both of those and using the adjunct and the super pale colored malt, you can get a beer at 15 and 16 Plato look like it's a beer at 11 Plato. Like it, and that's something that you just can't do with just 100% malt. If you use 100% malt, you're never going to get it to look like the EBC or the Lovabond of that light lager. So it's what's fun about Relapse, what's fun about Cold IPA is that it's snaky. You look at this beer and your eyes are saying that looks like Budweiser, that looks like Miller High Life or something like that, and then you smell it and it smells like an IPA, and you drink it and it drinks like 7%. So that's like the fun trick of Cold IPA that I think that a lot of people, that sometimes is missed on people, is that getting the color and the clarity right. And the only way you can do that is by using a high adjunct base, in my opinion, to get it done really, really, really. You want it to be strikingly different in its appearance.
How does that express? Yeah, for you guys, Sam.
Well, yeah, we've done both approaches and kind of, other than, I guess, short of cereal mashing. And I think, that's something that with the adjunct usage that we played around with, we've always used flaked products. And then the stronger beers, dextrose sugar as well as an adjunct. So we did a double cold IPA as our kind of like propagator anniversary beer last year. And I was kind of conscious of not cutting the, of too high of an adjunct load of maintaining that balance and not have it just be a little too hot, because we were also going to be adding dextrose. So I think, we were trying to balance out. So, we were using some rice, some dextrose, but not as high of a content of rice as we would do. We'd probably be around 20%, 15, 20 in the single. So I was looking Another Life, we're in that range. And, we're also using an extra pale, super pale Pilsner malt in that. And so I was saying, we were just having fun with that this summer. We were let's just make super, super pale. I mean, it just, it drinks like you're almost drinking just a light lager, except for, it's up in the 6s and, so not too heavy. But yeah, in the double range, we definitely had to be conscious of okay, once you start adding dextrose sugar, it's already having the effect of lightening the malt character. So adding too much adjunct on that, I didn't want to go too far. And, with Hopnosis, we're using a standard 2-row, and so there is a little more color, like Kevin was saying. And then, I do think we have the advantage, large scale, producing that beer on a large German brew house. That's a super efficient steam heated system. It develops almost no color. And I think, especially compared to smaller scale craft brewers, whether it's direct fire or steam, you're always going to be developing more color. You're going to get more hot side aeration. And so on these larger systems, it's basically zero color development compared to some systems. So I think that does play into it, and when I have beers from brewers that, are doing, especially if you're on like a 10 barrel, 15 barrel direct fire system, you're just going to be making a different beer. And I think that's probably where adding more adjunct is really going to help you out as far as controlling color, and keeping that body down because you're going to develop more of it. But yeah, we'll add a couple more things. Sometimes a little bit of wheat, sometimes a pinch of carapils, just for a little foam. But other than that, yeah, it's super simple. I mean, the idea is that there's nothing with any actual like color going in. You still want the beer to be essentially as light as possible. And yeah, when you look at, if I put, a couple like our, higher adjunct version with the all malt version next to each other, you can't tell a difference. So like Kevin was saying, like it's not, they are a slightly different beer. So I'd say like we're kind of riding that line between the super pale end of modern West Coast IPA. And I think that West Coast IPAs have all drifted in that direction, especially in California, Southern California, over the last couple of years. Everyone has just been moving paler. But yeah, I still think the adjunct can be really useful. And it's not, for me, it's also modifying the flavor somewhat. I mean, depending, that like, I don't know, I really like the flavor of rice. And in those levels, it just, for me, it's like, it adds this kind of round sweetness. But again, the beers finish out very dry. So it's hard to, describe in that context of it. It's not really adding sweetness, but there is a perception there. It might be just lowering some tannin from the malt. You're getting, especially depending on the brew house, if you're getting any huskiness, any excessive tannin content, if you're lowering that by adding adjunct, then you're really rounding out the flavor, and it comes across as a more pleasant sweetness to me.
That's interesting. Jude, yeah.
I don't think I could add anything to this conversation that Sam and Kevin haven't already touched on. Can I ask I know we're up against time. Can I ask a quick question to Sam and Kevin about yeast?
Absolutely. We have as much time as you guys want. So yeah.
Right on. Could you guys kind of articulate, when you wrap your head around what the yeast character in cold IPA is, whether like it's present yeast character or absence of yeast character? What do you think of what yeast character plays a role in cold IPA? Can I articulate that? It's something I'm always curious about, what's happening, what's not.
We're still fermenting kind of at the high end of lager range usually, to try to, suppress the ester to a point where you're just not noticing it at all. Where I think, and I've definitely, I've used 3470 all the way up, 65, even letting it get up to about 68 degrees. And, a lot of lager yeasts are perfectly happy there. And the esters are still, below what you're going to get with any ale yeast for the most part. I think in a cleaner, when you do more of a steam style beer, I think you notice that slightly more. And I think that, the kind of traditional like Angerstein profiles, like you really are noticing that lager yeast. There is a fruitiness developing because of how that beer is fermented. But in West Coast Pils Cold IPA, just to take that, example, if you're doing it more like that, I don't think you notice it. I mean, for me, it's like there's something there. And 3470, I think the warmer you ferment it, it expresses slightly floral. And yeah, that's about the main character, but it's always complementary to the hops. I think, the main thing that we ever notice, if I am noticing the yeast at all, is sulfur, and that's, retaining a little bit more. And so I think the warmer dry hop for us has been key in getting the balance we want there. And yeah, definitely, and that to me, going back, that was the downfall of a lot of IPL, was this kind of, unharmonious mixture of sulfur content and hop aroma that was happening with cold dry hops with longer ferments, where you had more sulfur. And so I think finding that balance is really key.
Yeah, I would also say that yeast pitch and aeration level matters a lot. 34, if you are using 34 like we are, it has a tendency to throw a lot of banana. And especially in like Doppelbock and bigger, stronger beers, when you are fermenting cold, and being able to get if you're going to ferment really, really cold like that, getting a huge pitch is really important. But if you're not, you don't want to over pitch this beer, because to get out a lot of these sulfur compounds, you need a lot of scrubbing action. To do that, you need some cell duplication. So if your cells are only duplicating once or twice, You're just not getting that active of a fermentation. It's duplicating. They eat the sugar, they go to bed. You actually kind of want to pitch this more appropriate, like you would a Chico beer, and or pitch it colder and let it free rise over 24, 48 hours and just go to town. That Wayfinder, we had double batch tanks. We had a 10 barrel system and 20 barrel tanks. So we would pitch the first turn at like 49 degrees and then pitch the second turn at 55 or wherever it was, and then let it go free rise up to 65. But we were only pitching, we'd only pitch yeast on the first day, and we'd only pitch 10 barrels worth of yeast, because by the time the second day came around, it was at least doubled or even tripled. And then watching our aeration level, we also only aerated with sterile air. Any lager yeast only got sterile air and never got bottled oxygen. So keeping the ppm down to about 8 ppm on the total air to make sure our cell duplication wasn't going crazy. But also not underperforming too. So yeah, it's like lager yeast is that balance of trying to make sure you pitch an appropriate amount, you aerate an appropriate amount, and you have an appropriate amount of fermentation. So that's kind of always been the juggling act. But if you ask my opinion on lager brewing, is trying to make all those pieces work harmoniously.
Yeah, we do use oxygen, but we're pretty tightly controlling that, and so we are targeting a higher level than you would get with air, but not excessive. And there's one thing that I learned, coming to the smaller scale and doing a lot of experimentation here, is that it's incredibly easy to dose massive amounts of oxygen. And, and so I think that's something that, whenever I'm, hanging out with other brewers doing collaborations brews, that's always something to look out for, because I think you can really get your lager fermentations out of whack with too much oxygen. And, you want that growth curve, to be, in a controlled manner, not out of control. But, it also, that makes up for a lot of sins when it comes to, yeast health and under pitching too. At least it helps. It's a Band-Aid. Excessive oxygen. It's not the optimum way to do it, but I think, if you're getting a healthy pitch in there, that's not, it's not, as heavy as a standard lager. We shoot for something kind of in the middle. We pitch pretty low for our ales. So we're always, looking for a lot of growth out of the ales. So we kind of shoot down the middle between that low ale pitch that we do and, our high lager pitch, and then give it, a decent amount, probably shooting for about, 15, 16 ppm, oxygen. So not crazy high, like you would if you were using like juice or, something like that, but definitely higher. And then getting some growth out of it that way.
It's interesting because one of the things I like to say about it is you're using sterile air and lager yeast or lager fermentations is traditional because of Reinheitsgebot, but you weren't able to use bottled oxygen. And so it's funny in craft brewing, I think that it's based a lot on ale brewing and home brewing, that everybody kind of feels like, bottled oxygen is just ubiquitous in our scene. But if you talk to a lot of old school lager brewers, it is not ubiquitous at all. I don't count on my hands how many people actually use bottled oxygen at some of the bigger lager breweries. They almost all use sterile air because of the Reinheitsgebot and because of tradition, but also because of that. It's a way of saying, well, if this is how much oxygen I'm going to be able to, then I have to adjust my pitch and my everything else, my fermentation. I have to control these other elements. And that's why a lot of the other reasons, it's a whole style, So when in doubt, Reinheitsgebot, just stick with the past if you don't know what you're doing. That's what I tell people.
That was great. That's that'll be one of my biggest takeaways, is I learned another new thing about cold IPA just now. Fucking A.
Well, as we let's pull out here, as we finish up, and just kind of talk about cold IPA in a theoretical sense. I think there's plenty of arguments out there, and I think every beer festival I go to, when people have been drinking, we get into some sort of argument over cold IPA. There's a lot of folks that love to make impassioned arguments about these kinds of things, but I think as we all here agree, the proof is in the beer itself. And when you taste a well-made IPA made in this kind of cold IPA style, and you see that kind of brightness and directness and that kind of focus and the way that it allows these beautiful hop characters to pop out with this also kind of refinement to it. There's something to it that also feels like its own. It is its own thing and probably merits its own discussions as its own thing. Certainly, especially in this current context where we now have separate categories for American IPA, West Coast IPA, New Zealand IPA, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. If we can slice and dice these styles of IPA that tightly to create more space, to celebrate the great work that the brewers are doing in those, then we certainly probably have space for cold IPA. Thinking about it in that sense, what's your elevator pitch for cold IPA now? If you were going to make a quick case for it, what would that be in a few sentences, Sam?
Well, I think just kind of leaning into the cleanliness of it, just focusing on just crystal clear, dry, really light, clean malt flavor, clean hop expression, letting the hops take center stage. And that's the side of, and there's a lot of brewers that I talk to now that are using lager yeast to make IPAs that aren't, but they're just not really into going in that hard in that direction. They just, and so they just want to be, I'm just making West Coast IPA, whatever. But I think there's something to be said for that kind of that approach that you were saying, no, cold, if I'm going to call it cold IPA, it's because I am going for this certain flavor profile. And it is that, that kind of extreme West and the West Coast end, it's not just a West Coast IPA, right? It's that specific approach. And I think that, those beers can be really delicious and, I really enjoy them. So, I hope more people kind of find that that's working for them too.
Jude, what's your elevator pitch for cold IPA?
I would say, do you like the tightest of tight hop expressive slammers? Then you'll love cold IPA. It's opened up so many doors. It's lowered so many, barriers. And I feel that it could appeal to someone who's about dogma, but at the same time, that is free enough to consider everything and not be so rigid. And as a result, you start to see things for their individual parts and then how you can apply them to what you already know. I think so many strides have been made possible through cold IPA. It's a crusher. When you want to have cold IPA, there's nothing that you can have like it unless you have a cold IPA.
Kevin, what's your elevator pitch?
Drinkability, and drinkability. I think those are, when we talk about beer, selling beer, making beer, then that's always the little purple dragon we're always trying to trace is, yeah, sure, this beer is cool. Yeah, it's interesting. But do you want two of them? The best beers out there are going to be ones that are repeatable. You think about the best IPAs, whether it's Two Hearted, like we talked about, or Pliny, or any of these ones that have all this national acclaim, they're repeatable. People have them again and again that keep getting voted in as one of the best IPAs because they're drinkable. And I think cold IPA has something that some other beers that are a little bit more stunt-like don't have, and that's that you can have three of them and still, you shouldn't have three of them. They're quite strong. But, depending on your size and depending on how much food you've had. Never mind. Okay. What I'm trying to say is that they're very drinkable. They're very shelf-stable. They're more shelf-stable. They're not shelf-stable. They're more shelf-stable than other products that are hoppy IPA. And people like the marketing. I kind of envision, when it comes to that marketing thing we were talking about earlier, can you imagine porter never existing and then somebody comes out with a black beer right now and says, this is my porter. Well, why'd you call it a porter? Oh, I know. Doesn't it seem like a porter? You'd be laughed out of the face of it. Yeah,
that's just a stout. That's just a stout, Kevin.
Just a stout, Kevin. Yeah.
How can you call it that?
I'm surprised India Black Ale doesn't get more, crowd for how can it be black if it's a pale ale? It doesn't make sense. Yeah. So I think that it shouldn't
on that subject, Kevin, I've got a podcast coming up in a couple weeks after this with Evan from the Colonel in London, where they make an export India porter because apparently, porter was actually the most exported beer. And it was quite hoppy. And actually has a lot in common with what we think of as hoppy American black ale, Cascadian dark ale, or black IPA. Strangely enough, there's some. So anyway, pay attention for that episode down the road. We'll get into some of those questions in that. I appreciate all of you guys talking with me about cold IPA here on this episode, and I think this is all a great place to bring it to a close. G&D Chillers has set the standard on quality, service, and reliability with 24/7 service and support. Available through BSG, Gambrinus Malting combines European-influenced malting practices with the finest barley, wheat, and rye. Try Old Orchard's flavored craft juice concentrate blends in your next craft beverage. ProBrew has rotary can fillers in stock with a 2 to 4 week lead time. Omega's stylized yeasts bring intense guava and passion fruit aromas out of your malt and hops. Don't miss keynote speaker Rob Todd from Allagash Brewing at the 2024 California Craft Beer Summit. Join the American Homebrewers Association to unlock the 2023 National Homebrew Competition, medal-winning recipes, and Alpha Brewing Operations has helped to build hundreds of award-winning breweries and other craft beverage businesses. If you've enjoyed this episode and any others, go to beerandbrewing.com, click on that subscribe button. And hey, if there's a brewer in your life that needs a fantastic gift this holiday season, give a gift subscription. Show them just how much you love them by sharing Craft Beer and Brewing magazine and beerandbrewing.com content with them for the entire year. Kevin, if people want to learn more about Gold Dot, Heater Allen, and your approach to cold IPA, where do they find you all?
HeaterAllen.com at the moment. We haven't really launched the Gold Dot page yet, so Heater Allen, just check us out there.
Awesome. Jude, if people want to learn more about Hop Butcher and your all's approach to hoppy beer, where do they find you all?
Hopbutcher.com, and we're also at Hop Butcher across all the channels, Twitter, X, Facebook, Instagram. We're pretty responsive too. We talk a lot on there. So if you ever want to reach out and holler at us, we'll holler at you.
Awesome. Sam, if people want to learn more about what beers you're making at the Propagator or Firestone Walker in general, where do they find you all?
FirestoneBeer.com, at Firestone Walker, at Firestone Walker _Propagator for some more Propagator specific stuff. But yeah, you'll be able to get everything there. And I will just say we did a cold black IPA. That's our last release here, so I don't want to make any heads explode right now, but look for that right now.
Cold black IPA. I got to get a hold of that. I got to talk to your people, Sam, and make sure I can try some of that. Thanks to all of you guys for talking with me, about making cold IPA. It's been awesome, and I appreciate everyone's perspective on it. Cheers.
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 This podcast has been brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing magazine for those who love to make and drink great beer. To learn more or to subscribe, visit beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew.